This is a Chinese monster for a high-speed line. He lifts a concrete beam of 2.2 million S-pounds. Himself stretches from one support to another by 130 feet and installs it himself. So fast in China, they are building a bridge over which, for the first time on the planet, trains will pass over the sea at a speed of 220 miles per hour. And here they learned how to cause skyscrapers in 19 days, hospitals in 10 days, residential building built in 24 hours, laid high-speed railways from scratch more than the whole world combined, stadiums, tunnels under the sea, 60 miles bridges. Stop. Everything that I have just thrown can be shown in 1 second. How did China manage to become the world's main builder and investor from a poor village? And why is this just the beginning? What unites the headquarters of the African Union in Ethiopia, the seaport in Sri Lanka? All this is being built or is being built by the Chinese. To assess the real scale, let's take, for example, a map of Africa. In which countries of the continent do you think Chinese construction is currently underway? All of them. Well, except for this small territory of Eswatini. Nigeria received $5 million for the construction of a hydroelectric dam. The largest bridge in Africa and Mozambique is being built with Chinese money. In 2017, the Kenyan Railway was built over 300 miles long at a speed of 2,300 feet per day. It was the Chinese CRBC on the Cape Verde Islands in the ocean. So it was not the little Chinese who were able to build housing, but a dam, a stadium, and the local parliament building. By the way, a new Chinese parliament is also being prepared in Zimbabwe.
You know Chinese they are skillful.
And now pay attention to how much money China earns on construction in Africa. In 2003, China earned $2.5 billion, which was already quite good, but now it is 25 times more every year. $50 billion is stable. The question is why China? And why in Africa? Everything is logical. Little money and many opportunities. It is here in China that the Chinese test their skills on how they can conquer the world without weapons. What are the advantages of Chinese construction? First, they do it faster than anyone else. Secondly, it is made cheaper than all the others. Thirdly, they will be happy to build on credit. Is now all on concrete examples, which means faster and cheaper. Look here, there are tunneling shields for tunnel construction. In China, there is a boom in the construction of tunnels for railways, subways, and everything in some wild conditions. So they are digging a direct path deep into the mountains at an altitude of several thousand feet. There's just not enough oxygen. Or with such equipment, the longest tunnel under the sea is being dug. The work progressing at the rate of 33 feet per day and costing only $10 million for 0.62 miles. For comparison, in the USA, the same 0.62-mile tunnel will cost $50 million, while in Russia, according to official data, the metro is being built for $93 million. It's cheap and fast. Question: that's why in debt. We explain with a concrete example. In 2008, Sri Lanka ambitiously decides to invest in its own development and build a new deepwater port. But there is no money of its own. Relations with the USA are so-so. And as a result, the port kindly agrees to build who? That's right, the Chinese. Naturally, not for free, but at a percentage. Things didn't work out at the port. It turned out to be unprofitable. And here you need to repay a loan to China in the amount of more than $1 billion. But as you remember, there is no money. And the Chinese are kind guys. They are ready to ask for a loan, but on the condition that Sri Lanka leases the port for 99 years. No, really, the port was built in vain. And in 2011, Sri Lanka agrees. That is, it actually cedes part of its territory, albeit a small one, to another country, China.
Only 10 nautical miles from the main trade route, positioning it in the ideal location to facilitate trade from the east to the west and vice versa.
The same can happen with the Kenyan port at Mombasa. Do you remember where the Chinese built the railways in record time? And as you understand, not for free but at the same interest. Only the Kenyan debt is already almost $5 billion. There are proceedings now, but I think the methods of the Chinese are clear. As American President John Adams, there are two ways to conquer states: the first, by the sword, the second, by duty. China usually chooses the second. But how did China take a sharp step forward, and how much power does it have? Remember, in the 20th century, everyone admired the Japanese economy there, technology, construction, and then abruptly stopped. Let's go back 50 years ago. The end of the 60s of the 20th century. The Soviet Union is building standard housing and a standard metro at an incredible pace. And the Chinese decide to come to the Soviet Union for advice. They are going to build a subway in Beijing, and therefore they came to study, or as further stories will show. Copy and paste. But then, videographers admired not the Chinese, but the Soviet high-speed construction.
The Soviet industrial might has been turned to the biggest housing program in the history of the world.
And in principle, then China, the country is nothing special. A planned economy, portraits of leaders, communist slogans even at home in Asia. Things are going much better with the same Korea. And in Japan, there is a real economic boom. But keep an eye on the numbers. They will all show in 1980, 85% of the inhabitants of the United States already live in cities. This is approximately 175 million people. In the same 1980, 175 million Chinese already live in cities in China too. But the difference is that the population of China at that moment was not 226 million American citizens, but 1 billion. That is, out of this billion, it turns out 800 million. These are beggars who live on less than $2 a day and work inefficiently. And it turns out that there was a lot of very cheap labor in China. It remained to figure out how to deliver this labor from the fields of China to the workplace. And in the same 1980, the new Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping, decided to experiment. Before that, he visited Singapore and was shocked by how well it turns out to be possible to live and develop. And then there's my favorite story about how a fishing village with 30,000 inhabitants, this time Shenzhen, turns into a Chinese Silicon Valley for 12 million human. How did it happen? Deng Xiaoping is creating a Shenzhen-free economic zone for foreign companies. What does China offer them? Firstly, China will be built and developed only with your money and foreign investment. Because we don't have money. But there are 1 billion workers. And so that these foreign investments come, foreigners are exempt from duties and corporate tax. That is, if there is no profit, you pay nothing. If there is profit, there is no need to pay for another 5 years. We will wait. There are still a lot of discounts and additional lures, but that's not the point. Secondly, everything that will be produced in Shenzhen will be exported. And the third Shenzhen was not chosen by chance. Look across the road from Hong Kong to Taiwan, where the smoke of economic development is billowing and China is successfully sitting on the tail of the smoke. Thus, over the entire 40 years, Shenzhen will increase by 20% per year. And from $40 million, will soar to $400 billion. What does this have to do with technology builders? Remember the story of the arrival of Chinese metro builders in the USSR and learn. And here you don't have to go anywhere. The Chinese government is ingeniously turning the course that all the builders themselves come and bring both money and technology. Well, there is a good example. In 2005, both China and the United States have one common problem. The distance between cities is large, and it is impossible to move quickly. In general, we need high-speed trains. This is a problem. We look at how the issue is solved in different ways. Passenger trains have not been popular in the United States for a long time. This is due to the development of aviation, which replaced passenger transport. According to a report from the Congressional Budget Office, passenger traffic fell 20% from 2000 to 2005, and freight traffic in the United States is only increasing in volume. As a result, it was decided to maintain overnight trains connecting California with New Jersey, and the remaining routes passing through the entire country should be given over to cargo transportation. What is China doing? Let me remind you that they don't have high-speed railways either. The same applies to China's own trains. There they at least earned something. They seemed unsafe. China has decided to turn to trusted foreigners, but China decided that it would not just buy, but drag the technology to itself, because quotes from local leadership sound like this: "Our development cannot be beneficial to foreign economies." China will invest $300 billion in high-speed railways. To understand this is about 10% of the annual budget of the United States. And as I have already said, China will actually create 250,000 miles of high-speed branches from scratch. Now this is more than the rest of the world combined, plus China will have such a variety of high-speed trains of its own production. For example, the CRH 380 is a Chinese bullet train that squeezes 220 miles per hour. The Chinese did not develop it themselves, but together with the German Siemens, Canadian Bombardier, and the Japanese Hitachi, but produces it exclusively in China. Someone who knows will probably write comments now. Don't be shy and generally condemn this program. That these investments have not paid off and will never pay off because many railways are still unprofitable. I won't argue. But these gigantic expenditures on their own infrastructure have launched such crazy processes of developing their own technologies that they will splash out and have already splashed out beyond China. The story will also be about construction. For example, skyscrapers. The Chinese love them. Over the past 30 years, they have built as many skyscrapers as the United States in the entire 20th century. And if you look at the top 10 tallest buildings in the world today, half of them will be Chinese. And if you look at the list of the top 100 cities with the largest number of skyscrapers, then again, half of them are Chinese. It is clear that the entire history of mankind only does what is measured by length and possibilities. Therefore, as soon as these opportunities appear, they immediately want to show them as much as possible so that it can be seen. That is why every Chinese metropolis has its own record holder: Shanghai, Ginseng, Guangzhou, Tianjin, and Beijing. 8 years ago, the Chinese decided to show not only how high they could build, but also how quickly. In Changsha, the 57-story skyscraper was assembled in 19 days. 11 years ago, a 30-story building was built in 15 days. The fact is that such a design does not even require concrete, but only a steel frame. People make all the modules in a factory and just assemble them on site, like a Lego set. And with these other frames in China, they decided to assemble the tallest building in the world with 220 floors in just 90 days. But this is not counting the preparation of the foundation. It would have turned out 210 well too quickly. But suddenly, China decided to ban skyscrapers. Nothing can be built anywhere higher than 1,500 feet. In smaller towns, the ban will be at 800 feet. And in some places, as low as 300 feet. Why did they decide this in a country whose population is already 1.5 billion people? And it seems that high-rise construction is inevitable. First of all, watch the 950 feet tall concrete glass shake as people from the skyscraper run as fast as they can. It turns out that the race to build higher faster has led to the fact that this is a problem with security. And secondly, think about it over these 40 years of continuous development. Hundreds of millions of wealthy citizens have grown up in China who wants to live in comfortable green cities and not in stone glass concrete jungles. And it is no longer a situation where most poor people will simply move from villages to cities in search of a better way to live there. Now they have money and they have their own technologies. They need to be used somewhere. And the example of Africa shows that China will turn its economic influence into a political one. Poor countries, in order not to lose to their neighbors, will need infrastructure technologies. It will need to be built, and China will turn up here with its speed, cheapness, and credit. Well, who will take a chance on this one can become a new Kenya, Sri Lanka, or Ecuador. Why Ecuador? A few years ago, the Chinese promptly built a hydroelectric power station there. But after a while, dangerous cracks began to appear there. Downstream, farmers are subject to constant flooding. And here is a loan of $1.7 billion. And each year, Ecuador only needs to pay interest on $125 million. Other huge loans have brought the country to the point that they give 80% of all the oil they produce to Chinese companies. And now, friends, Chinese wisdom. Where do all those figures of gigantic profits in Africa come from? China has invested $300 billion in African construction. But most of the plants, factories, roads, railways, ports, platens, which were built with Chinese money, remain in Chinese ownership due to debts. Millions of Chinese already work there, but in some places all this is serviced at the expense of the budget, and if the locals themselves work, then for pennies. Chinese expansion will only gain momentum as resources within the country are already depleted. 65% of the population lives in cities. About the same was in the USA in 1970, but at the beginning of the 20th century, our country was in a favorable situation. All Americans, following the example of Detroit, simply needed industrialization forward, and the United States essentially transferred labor resources to the development of the same industry. And if you don't take into account the Great Depression, the U.S. economy grew by 5 to 6% per year, and apparently this was a world record at that time, and therefore, there were no super technological breakthroughs all the time, only due to the more efficient distribution of labor resources and government investments in new plants and factories. So China does the same by investing in technology and construction internally while controlling the weak externally. So be strong and invest in yourself and your future. Such a story. Subscribe to the channel. It will only get more interesting.